I am 94 years old, and I have just learned that the greatest act of love in my life was built on a secret I was never supposed to find out. For 60 years, I believed my wife Ruth and I gave an abandoned little boy a home. I believed we rescued him. I believed that was our story. But 3 months ago, an elderly woman knocked on my door and told me the truth that Ruth carried quietly to her grave. We did not rescue Samuel. Ruth did, from a decision she was forced to make before she ever knew my name. My name is George William Harper, born January 11th, 1930, in Columbus, Ohio. I worked 36 years as an accountant for Meridian Trust Company on Broad Street, downtown. I married Ruth Eleanor Page on May 22, 1961, in a small church ceremony with 14 guests and a single bunch of white flowers she held with both hands. We never had biological children. Doctors said it simply was not going to happen. We grieved that quietly together and moved forward, the way people of our generation did. Without complaint, without long discussions, just forward. 2 years into our marriage, Ruth came home one evening from a charity visit with red eyes and steady hands and said 7 words that changed both our lives. "George, there is a boy who needs us." I said yes before she finished the sentence. I had no idea what I was really saying yes to, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Ruth was the kind of woman who made you feel like the most important person in any room. Not because she was loud or dramatic about it, just the opposite. She was quiet and certain in the way she loved you, like she had decided completely and never looked back. I met her at a work dinner in the spring of 1959. She was sitting across the table from me talking to someone else, and I spent the entire evening trying to think of a reason to speak to her. I finally asked if she wanted more coffee. She smiled and said she had already had 3 cups and probably did not need a 4th. I fell in love with her in that exact moment. We married 2 years later. Moved into a brick house on Carlton Avenue with tall windows and a small garden Ruth filled with yellow roses every spring. Life was calm, honest, good in the way that ordinary things are good when you do not take them for granted. Then in the spring of 1963, Ruth began volunteering at a children's charity on Millfield Road every Saturday morning without fail. She came home from those visits warm and quiet and sometimes a little distant in a way I could not name. I thought she was simply moved by the children there. She was moved by one child specifically. I just did not know that yet. Then one Tuesday evening she came home different, not sad, not tired, certain, like someone who had finally made a decision they had been carrying for a very long time. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table that Tuesday evening, hands folded, back straight, eyes steady. The kind of posture Ruth only had when something truly mattered to her. The kitchen was quiet, the clock on the wall ticked. Outside, the yellow roses were just beginning to come back after winter. She said it simply and directly. "George, there is a 2-year-old boy at Millfield Road. His name is not on any family list. Nobody is coming for him. I have been sitting with him every Saturday for 4 months, and I cannot walk away from him anymore." I looked at her for a long moment. "You want to adopt him?" I said. She nodded once, slowly, No hesitation, no nervousness, just that same quiet certainty. We went through the process over the following weeks. Ruth handled most of the paperwork herself, said she did not want to burden me with the details while I was managing a difficult quarter at work. I was grateful at the time. I understand now why she kept me at a distance from those documents. We brought Samuel home on a Saturday morning in October of 1963. He was small and serious, and he walked through our front door holding a toy wooden horse with both hands. Ruth knelt down to his level the moment he crossed the threshold, and the look on her face when she held him, I had never seen that expression before in 2 years of marriage. I thought it was the beauty of becoming a mother. I was only partly wrong. Ruth was a wonderful mother, completely devoted, endlessly patient, present in every way that mattered. But there was always something slightly different about the way she loved Samuel compared to how I imagined normal adoption bonding would feel. It was not something I could point to directly, just a quiet intensity, like she was making up for something, like every hug lasted one moment longer than it needed to, like she watched him sleep, sometimes standing in the doorway of his room for reasons she never explained. I told myself it was simply how Ruth loved, deeply, without reservation. Samuel grew into a kind and gentle young man, studied engineering, married a good woman named Patricia in 1989, gave us 2 grandchildren. He called me every Sunday morning without fail until the day Ruth passed. Ruth died peacefully in March of 2020. I thought grief was the hardest thing left for me. I was wrong. 8 months after we buried her, a woman named Clara Simmons called the house. She said she was an old friend of Ruth's from before our marriage. She was 91 years old and not well, and said she could not leave this world without someone in our family knowing the truth. I asked her what truth. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "George, Samuel was not an abandoned child that Ruth discovered at that orphanage." The clock ticked on the kitchen wall. The yellow roses were dead for winter outside. Samuel was Ruth's son. She gave birth to him in February of 1959, 2 years before she ever met you. I sat down slowly in my chair, and the whole shape of my life shifted completely. Clara spoke slowly, carefully, like she had rehearsed this moment many times and was still not fully ready for it. Ruth had met a man named Daniel Cole in the spring of 1957. He was quiet and charming and completely unprepared for responsibility. When Ruth told him she was pregnant in late 1958, Daniel Cole packed a bag and disappeared within a week. No letter, no explanation, nothing. Ruth was 23 years old, alone, terrified. Her family was deeply religious and deeply concerned about reputation. They made the decision quickly and without much discussion. Ruth would carry the pregnancy privately. The baby would go to an orphanage on Millfield Road immediately after birth. Ruth held Samuel for 40 minutes after he was born. Then she handed him to a nurse and walked out of that hospital and never spoke of it to anyone. Not to her family, not to her friends, not to me. Not ever. She met me 8 months later at that work dinner, married me 2 years after that, And then in 1963, she walked into that orphanage on Millfield Road as a charity volunteer and found him. 4 years old by then, still unclaimed, still waiting. She went back every Saturday for 4 months before she came home and sat across from me at the kitchen table with folded hands and that quiet, devastating certainty. She did not find Samuel by accident. She went looking for him. And I drove them both home without knowing what I was carrying in that car. I kept thinking about one thing after Clara hung up the phone. Samuel's birthday was always celebrated on the date Ruth told me the orphanage recorded his arrival. February 3rd. The same date Ruth told me once, quietly, only once, was the hardest day of her life. I thought she meant something else entirely. I was looking directly at the answer for 60 years, and I called it coincidence every single time. Clara said one final thing before she hung up. Ruth loved you, George, completely and honestly. But Samuel was the piece of herself she could not live without. I sat in that kitchen until the room went dark, thinking about the boy who walked through my front door holding a wooden horse, thinking about the look on Ruth's face when she knelt down to hold him. And I finally understood what that expression was. It was not the beauty of becoming a mother. It was the agony and relief of becoming one again. For 60 years, I thought I gave Ruth a family. But Ruth had already made her family before I ever knew her name. I was not the beginning of that story. I was the safe place she found to finally bring it home. I called Samuel that same evening. He drove over within the hour, sat across from me at that same kitchen table where Ruth had once sat with folded hands and quiet certainty. He was 62 years old, gray at his temples. Same serious expression he had carried since the day he walked through our front door holding that wooden horse. I told him everything Clara told me, slowly, without skipping anything. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the kitchen was completely silent. The clock ticked. The winter garden was dark outside the window, where Ruth's yellow roses would come back in spring without her. Samuel looked down at the table for a long time. Then he looked up at me with wet eyes and said the words I was not prepared for. "Dad, she chose you to bring me home to. Of every person in the world, she chose you." I could not speak, because in that moment I understood something that completely rearranged my grief. Ruth did not deceive me out of selfishness. She carried an impossible weight alone for years, found the courage to go back for her son, and trusted me, without telling me why, to be the father she could not ask me directly to be. She knew what I would say yes to. She knew me completely. I found Ruth's Bible the following morning. Between Psalms 27 and 28, a small faded photograph of a young man I had never seen before. Daniel Cole, Samuel's biological father. I looked at it for a long moment, then I placed it back exactly where Ruth had kept it for 60 years. Some things are not mine to disturb. I am 94 years old. I raised a son I did not know was already loved before he arrived at my door. And I have decided that changes nothing. He called me Dad for 60 years. I was there for every single one of them. Ruth gave me a secret I did not know I was keeping. But beneath that secret was something true and something whole. A family she built the only way she knew how, with silence, with courage, with the one man she trusted most in the world. I walk past Samuel's childhood bedroom every morning on my way to the kitchen. The wooden horse is still on the shelf where he left it in 1981. I never moved it. I never will. Ruth never got to hear me say I understood. If this story reached something inside you, please subscribe and tell me in the comments. Was Ruth wrong to carry this secret for 60 years? Or was she simply the bravest woman in the room?